There's still a lot of mysteries around a lot of things that happened in this country.
In the night, up came a person who was wearing a cloak, and he had in his hands the Great Seal of the United States. Jefferson, of course, looked at it and said, "This is it."
It's a very dangerous thing to reveal the truth, but we have to.
Let's go back to really important individuals here. His name is Nicholas Roerich.
The truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the top. Nicholas Roerich is the person who is responsible for that ending up on the dollar bill.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the President of the United States, and Henry Wallace was the Secretary of Agriculture. Now, Henry Wallace was deeply involved in the occult.
Roerich to Wallace to FDR to the dollar bill.
I was initiated into this very ancient order.
Here we are at the Nicholas Roerich Museum.
Do you really think it has anything to do with the Illuminati?
The owl is the totem symbol of the Illuminati.
Yes, because Roerich was the Illuminati.
They all seem to have been Masons.
His son was murdered.
Those who normally get out, they're killed. Hexagrams are used during occult ceremonies when you're summoning up demons.
Because we're dealing with Lucifer.
And the all-seeing eye of God is one of the emblems that the Freemasons use.
He said, "You're trying to say that Masonry is evil." I said, "It comes right out of the same pit of hell." Didn't win a lot of friends that day.
Our history of the dollar bill is a strange telling, one that involves an American president, a former vice president, a mysterious Russian mystic, and a determined Jewish researcher, on the trail of an ancient artifact that is said to have been in the possession of the most powerful rulers in history, and somehow directly influenced the design of the dollar bill. As incredible as it seems, it's believed this mysterious object could mark the beginning of Armageddon.
There's going to be a bloodbath there.
With them is an expert in the signs and symbols of the occult world.
This is not the eagle.
Who claims that the details of the dollar bill are no accident, but represent the diabolical working of secret societies.
This is the eye of the phoenix, looking on in favor of the secrets of the dollar bill.
Most debates about the design of the dollar bill usually involve the founding fathers of America, but it's important to remember that they only designed a Great Seal. There are many details to the dollar bill that go far beyond the seal itself. The Great Seal was developed through 3 committees, involving a total of 14 men. But in the end, the work was submitted in June of 1782 by essentially one man, Charles Thomson. What is little known is that while Thomson presented a preliminary sketch, his final design was submitted to Congress only in the form of a written description. Looking at the rough drawings Thomson put together with artist William Barton, it becomes clear that many of the specific details of the seal, as we know it today, were added later on. For example, above the head of the American eagle are 13 stars that form a 6-pointed hexagram. While Thomson's description called for the 13 stars, their hexagram formation was not part of his original description and is not present in the earliest realizations of the design. The hexagram seems to have been added in the 20th century. The nature of the Great Seal is so mysterious that some believe that it came from a supernatural force. An account recorded by Dr. Robert Hieronymus in his book, Founding Fathers, Secret Societies, says that the Great Seal was given to Thomas Jefferson by a mysterious cloaked figure.
I love that story. The Founding Fathers were trying to get the Great Seal of the United States designed. They needed to have a design for the Great Seal to represent our nation. And Jefferson went outside in the night, and up came a person, an individual who was wearing a cloak, whom he couldn't totally see, and he had in his hands the Great Seal of the United States. And he basically said, or this being said, you know, you're struggling over the symbol for our nation? Here it is.
The account reads that Jefferson told a strange story. A man approached him wearing a black cloak that practically covered him, face and all, and told him that he, the strange visitor, knew they were trying to devise a seal, and that he had a design which was appropriate and meaningful.
Jefferson, of course, looked at it, according to this story, and said, this is it. This is it. He knew it was it, and it was right. So he supposedly came running back into whatever, whether it was a tent or whatever it was, and he showed it to other individuals, and he told them about, they met this person outside. Of course, they went outside to go to find the guy, and he's gone. So supposedly we'll never find out who designed the Great Seal of the United States.
While Dr. Hieronymus admits that he is skeptical about such stories, there are others who claim to believe them to this day. Perhaps it has something to do with John Adams, who was on the first seal committee with Thomas Jefferson. According to the written account, John Adams was there when this bizarre event took place. Oddly enough, the Adams Memorial in Washington, D.C. is adorned with this mysterious cloaked figure. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. The first historical account of the Great Seal's design was written by a 19th century American Army officer named Charles A.L. Totten. In his book on the secret symbols of the dollar bill, Masonic author David Oveson writes that Totten equated the birth of the United States with the beginnings of what he called the New Atlantis, a title given to a work by Sir Francis Bacon, one of the mysterious financial backers of the Virginia colony. Oveson goes on to write that the Great Seal and the dollar bill represent the most extraordinary example in history of the public evolution of a magical design. Even as Sir Francis Bacon and his contemporary, Dr. John Dee, were said to be in contact with the spirit realm, there are those who believe that it is this dimension that has been guiding the course of America and the so-called evolution of the dollar bill. Debates have gone on for years about the secret symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States, whether or not these symbols represent secret societies, or if they are what the White House and the U.S. Congress currently tell us, symbols of divine providence, of stability, and the patriotism of America. What the Founding Fathers intended as they designed and ultimately approved of the Great Seal remains mostly a mystery.
There's still a lot of mysteries around a lot of things that happened in this country. It's not in our history books.
There can be no doubt that those things hidden in the shadows of the last 2 centuries are not easily brought to light. But when one comes into the modern era, into the age of photography, film, and the advanced practices of mass media, it becomes a bit easier to document world events and the intentions of those who have helped to shape them. In the late 19th century, Harvard professor Charles Eliot Norton referred to the Great Seal as a dull emblem of the Masonic fraternity. This idea was furthered by occult philosopher Manly P. Hall in the early part of the 20th century. Hall not only believed that the Great Seal was Masonic, but that it was created through the collective consciousness of the occult societies and represented the secret destiny that they had in mind for America.
I'd say that he saw the secret destiny of America as the beginning of a world democracy, and that this was a kind of an experiment in democracy that had been envisioned for thousands of years before. So he saw this much like Francis Bacon envisioned what he called the New Atlantis.
In 1926, Hall began publishing a newspaper called The All-Seeing Eye, dedicated to his occult views of philosophy. It was during Hall's era that the All-Seeing Eye of the Great Seal would be taken out of obscurity and placed on the back of the dollar bill by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1935. This might all be seen as just a coincidence, if not for the fact that FDR seemed to be familiar with Hall's teachings on the occult. Today, Hall's legacy is carried on at the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, California, a society that Hall founded in 1934, just 1 year before the Great Seal found its way onto the back of the dollar bill. The current president of Hall Society is Dr. Obadiah Harris, shown here in what is called the Wisdom Library at PRS. According to their website, the library is made up of writings that deal with divination, tarot cards, Kabbalah, alchemy, astrology, metaphysics, Buddhism, theosophy, and secret societies.
And wisdom literature is about relationships not only to each other, but to nature, to the universe. That's what this library is. This library is a library about the wisdom that is in nature and in relationships, and how it is that you can tap into that wisdom in any culture. It all overlaps. And Mr. Hall felt like that was really the future for the human race.
Like Hall, Dr. Harris believes in the destiny of America. Even more interesting is that Dr. Harris's own writing on the subject was unofficially acknowledged by an important figure in FDR's White House.
I wrote a little book one time. One of my first books I wrote was The Reawakening of the Americas. So we usually lose sight of the fact that the whole continent. And I got a little 1-cent postcard from Eleanor Roosevelt thanking me for that. I carried that around for years because I thought that was a great compliment.
But even more important was the familiarity that President Franklin Roosevelt had with the arcane literature in Manly Hall's so-called Wisdom Library, a collection of occult books that Hall had gathered from all over the world.
And Mr. Roosevelt himself, as you know, back in 1942, after the Pearl Harbor invasion, sent some of his people here to microfiche the works in this library because he looked upon it as a national treasure. He wanted to preserve it. And I was surprised that when I first heard that, just how much he seemed to know about such a treasure of wisdom that is contained here.
FDR's interest in the arcane and mystical was further reflected in the relationship he had with his Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Asgard Wallace.
And so it was then in 1935 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the President of the United States, and Henry Wallace was the Secretary of Agriculture. Now, Henry Wallace was deeply involved in the occult.
Wallace's interest in mysticism was well known in circles around Washington, D.C., but it was something that would eventually damage his career in American politics. H.L. Mencken dubbed Wallace the Swami, while it was also said of him that he was the only cabinet member who dabbled in the occult and who could cast a horoscope. In spite of all this, FDR ardently defended him. According to one account, when one of FDR's close advisors worried that many people considered Wallace a mystic, Roosevelt snapped, "He's not a mystic, he's a philosopher. He's got ideas, he thinks right, he'll help people think." But the question was, who was helping Wallace think? This question has been deemed critical because it was Henry Wallace who suggested to FDR that the Great Seal be placed on the back of the dollar bill. But why?
Well, it has a lot to do. Let's go back to really important individuals here. His name is Nicholas Roerich. Nicholas Roerich was a very advanced spiritual soul with considerable vision. Nicholas Roerich was also a Rosicrucian. He was also a member of other secret societies.
Roerich was a Russian painter and mystic who was deeply involved in theosophy and the teachings of Madame H.P. Blavatsky. He is famous for his travels into Tibet and the Far East in search of the legendary kingdom of Shambhala. But what was his relationship to FDR's Secretary of Agriculture?
I believe that Nicholas Roerich was a spiritual teacher, not a supreme spiritual teacher, but was a teacher of Henry Asgard Wallace.
Roerich was considered not only a teacher, but a spiritual mentor and guru to Henry Wallace. It's believed that Wallace recommended the Great Seal to FDR because of the mystical influence Roerich held over him.
The dollar bill was approved with the all-seeing eye and the truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the top of the because of Nicholas Roerich.
In the book, Tournament of Shadows, the authors document much of the activities and influence of Roerich during this period. They write that Roerich's influence was suspected in the adornment of the $1 bill, with a verso of the Great Seal showing a pyramid crowned by an all-seeing eye. The story of Wallace's role with FDR is told by the State Department in an official history called The Eagle and the Shield, a history of the Great Seal of the United States.
Henry Wallace, while sitting in the State Department, found a booklet on the Great Seal of the United States.
Wallace recollects that day in letters he wrote in 1951 and in 1955. He says, "Turning to page 53, I noted the colored reproduction of the reverse side of the seal. The Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum impressed me as meaning the New Deal of the ages."
In terms of the dollar, if there's a code about the New World Order, I think that they jumped a few decades from the New Deal, because the Novus Ordo Seclorum can be translated to the New Deal in English as easily and readily as to the New Order or the New World Order.
Initially, Wallace envisioned the Great Seal appearing on a coin. He took the idea to President Roosevelt.
So when Henry Wallace saw this booklet and saw this pyramid in the eye and the triangle, he was a Freemason. He was a member of a secret society. Immediately he said, "Whoa, what a symbol to have and not use. Let's use this." So it was he that went to the President, FDR, and FDR, being a Freemason, looked at those symbols and said, "Hey, yes, wow, this is, that's New Order of the Ages. What's the New Deal?" He actually thought to a degree that the Novus Ordo Seclorum was the New Deal.
Wallace wrote that Roosevelt, as he looked at the colored reproduction of the seal, was first struck with the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe. Next, he was impressed with the idea that the foundation for the New Order of the Ages had been laid in 1776, but that it would be completed only under the eye of the great architect. Roosevelt, like myself, was a 32nd degree Mason. He suggested that the seal be put on the dollar bill rather than a coin, and took the matter up with the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury at the time was Henry Morgenthau.
And he talked to Henry Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and got him convinced that we should put this esoteric emblem from the back of the Great Seal of the United States onto the back of the dollar bill. This really symbolized the fact that now the esoteric influence dominated the American government.
And Morgenthau, the Secretary of Treasury, wrote extensively about this point, and he said there's some strange cabal, some mystical order behind the scenes, calling shots on the artwork that appears now on our dollar bills. He had to approve it, and he later had found out that this was all Henry Wallace's. It was all based on Henry Wallace's relationship to Nicholas Roerich. Nicholas Roerich is the person who is responsible for that ending up on the dollar bill.
Today, the story of Roerich's mystical influence is told by a variety of occult researchers.
You know, the dollar bill thing was about the New World Order. Actually, that came from Franklin D. Roosevelt and others around him, even Nicholas Roerich.
It's almost like baseball. Roerich to Wallace to FDR to the dollar bill.
While many people have never heard of Roerich, he was a well-known figure during the FDR era, in the years preceding World War II. His works of art were internationally recognized, so much so that an entire building in New York was erected to house his many paintings. Roerich was nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize and was the inspiration for the Roerich Peace Pact, which was signed by Henry Wallace in the presence of President Roosevelt at the White House. In 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev called Roerich one of the cultural pillars of Russia. The Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first man in outer space, when asked what the Earth looked like from orbit, answered, very much like the paintings of Nicholas Roerich.
He was a great oil painter, bar none. He's one of the greatest in terms of the Himalayan Altai scenes that he depicted. He did some wonderful work. He was a gifted artist.
But Roerich's story is one of success and disgrace, as he eventually fell out of favor with his greatest supporters, and at one point was suspected by the Soviets, the Japanese, and the United States of being a spy.
Information was coming out that Roerich may have been used as a spy when he went into these other nations in the Far East. And with that, that's what broke the link between Henry Wallace and Nicholas Roerich.
To learn more about this mysterious figure and his influence on the dollar bill, we traveled to the Roerich Museum in New York, along with cipher expert and international codebreaker Buff Perry, who has long been associated with the museum and its curators.
Here we are at the Nicholas Roerich Museum at 319 West 107th Street, almost at the corner of Riverside Drive. His paintings hang on the walls of 3 floors of this building, and also many of the treasured archives, letters, and other writings and memorabilia of the Roerich family are housed here. I have a deep interest in the history of Nicholas Roerich and his family and their association with a long-lost artifact that I have had a lot to do with over the years.
We'll learn more about this artifact later on, as it ties together Nicholas Roerich with Henry Wallace, Manly P. Hall, and what some believe will be the future destiny of America. Like many who are involved in New Age and occult ideas, Nicholas Roerich dreamed of a united one-world order.
Nicholas Roerich is seen as one of the key individuals, historical individuals, that had a lot to do with the development of the League of Nations and subsequently the United Nations, and is recognized as such in the United Nations building. I'm told, I haven't seen such commemoration, but I'm told it's there. And the history of the United Nations is often characterized in association with Nicholas Roerich's global peace efforts.
Roerich's dream was shared by his disciple, Henry Wallace, as demonstrated by the book Henry A. Wallace, His Search for a New World Order. This concept is visualized by the cracked bronze globe that sits outside the United Nations building, where a new world is literally breaking forth from the old. But somehow, Roerich's ideas on the subject would get him into trouble with Wallace when he traveled abroad on behalf of the United States government. In the book, Tournament of Shadows, we read that Roerich had been chosen by Henry Wallace to scour Central Asia for drought-resistant grasses to combat the Dust Bowl. This was the genesis of the Roerich expedition, financed and staffed by the Department of Agriculture. But during his 2-year expedition, Roerich seemed to be on a mystical journey, one that involved his quest for the legendary city of Shambhala, and literally searching for signs of the second coming of Christ.
Nicholas Roerich's idea was that the second coming of Christ may happen within years, and that's why he visited India, China, etc., and Russia, and digging up and trying to locate spiritual centers and spiritual information along those lines.
Authors Meyer and Bryzak write that the search for Shambhala, which he identified with the second coming of Christ, and the Maitreya, or Buddha to come, obsessed Roerich. His paintings and writings thereafter conjured up his vision of a new age of peace, brotherhood, and enlightenment. But Roerich's concept of Christ, shown here in one of his paintings, was dramatically different from that of traditional Christianity. Both Roerich and Wallace were members of the Theosophical Society that was founded by Madame H.P. Blavatsky in the late 19th century. Blavatsky's view of religion can be summed up in her book, The Secret Doctrine. She makes use of the phrase, Demon est Deus inversus, which means the devil is God inverted. Her view was based on the ancient Gnostic belief that in the Garden of Eden, the serpent who tempted the woman was really an angel of light, and that God, who had created Adam and Eve, was really the devil. The reason is because God had forbidden man from partaking of the tree of knowledge, or gnosis. This is the origin of the term Gnostic, or Gnosticism. Blavatsky further argued that Jesus was only one Messiah among many, like Buddha, Krishna, and Muhammad, and that the fifth Buddha, also called the Maitreya, is the last Messiah who will come. She says he will appear as Maitreya Buddha, the last of the avatars, or way-showers. This belief and expectation are universal throughout the East. This is the event that is said to have consumed Nicholas Roerich, and that he would have taught to his devoted disciple, Henry Wallace. The proof of their bizarre relationship was more fully revealed in a series of letters penned by Wallace to Nicholas Roerich.
Newsweek with Westbrook Pegler and others made a very big story out of what they called the Guru letters, the letters that Henry Wallace would send to Nicholas Roerich, which obviously he considered him a spiritual teacher from that standpoint.
Wallace had gone from being Secretary of Agriculture to FDR's Vice President. Though his falling out with Roerich had happened some years earlier, The Guru letters would surface once he decided to run for president. They had been obtained by cantankerous news columnist Westbrook Pegler through an unidentified source. Pegler, along with H.L. Mencken, questioned Wallace in a news conference about the letters. But he was, at best, evasive and refused to answer their questions in a direct manner. The letters were signed H.A.W., assumed to be Henry Asgard Wallace. In one of the letters, Wallace allegedly wrote of curing his headaches at formal dinners by rubbing his forehead with a Tibetan amulet. In another letter, he said to Roerich, "I have been thinking of you holding the casket, the sacred, most precious casket, and I have thought of the new country going forth, and I have thought of the admonition, await the stone, the sign of Shambhala."
There's these letters, and they indicate very strongly, no matter how you want to interpret them, that he was his teacher.
Wallace went on to say, "We await the stone, and we welcome you again to this glorious land of destiny." The stone he's referring to is the artifact that cipher expert Buff Perry has been following for many years now. We learned about this mysterious stone during our first interview with Perry at Manly Hall's Philosophical Research Society, where a statuette of Nicholas Roerich, holding a casket like the one described by Wallace, sits on one of the tables in the library. It was first mentioned to us by Dr. Obadiah Harris.
Now, Dr. Harris, can you tell us about this statue here?
Oh well, this would be a very favorite thing to Manly Hall. This is Nicholas Roerich, who lived in the early part of actually, he lived even in the 20th century up until 1947. There's a Roerich Museum in New York, and this, of course, is of Mr. Roerich himself. Then there's this little casket, and in this casket symbolizes what he was given, which is the foundation stone of America. And we don't know where that stone is today. I think that Buff Perry knows a little more about where it might be now.
We then asked Buff Perry to explain the stone in relation to the statue of Nicholas Roerich.
The statue is based on a painting his wife Helena painted of him. The casket he's holding with a cloth fabric, a kind of sacred, appearing to be Tibetan cloth fabric over it, is a casket that contains a stone that variously has been called the Chintamani in Sanskrit, meaning the stone of wisdom, the Bethel or Bethel stone, which was Jacob's pillow stone, that you read about in Torah in the Old Testament, which became known as a Bethel stone, because it was used at the location of what became the town of Bethel, so Bethel. So this stone has an incredible history to it that has only recently really surfaced in terms of how it ended up in the hands of Nicholas Roerich, where it came from.
There can be no question that this stone in the casket consumed Roerich through the latter part of his life. His paintings are filled with the repeated imagery of it.
And here you have a man delivering that casket up again. It appears in, it seems like almost all of Roerich's paintings. These are supposed to be his family and ascendant masters carrying the Rothenberg casket in which that stone was kept.
Roerich called the stone the treasure of the world. Even his wife, Helena, is pictured in this portrait, which hangs in the Roerich Museum, with the casket resting next to her, something she and her husband had received under mysterious circumstances in 1923.
Everything changed once they received this.
But why would this artifact be of interest to FDR's Vice President, Henry Wallace? And how could it relate to the design of the Great Seal on the dollar bill? As Buff mentioned earlier, the stone is said to be the pillow stone of Jacob, upon which he had his dream of a ladder that stretched from earth to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. The ladder itself is a recurring symbol in secret societies, especially Freemasonry. Master Mason Albert Pike wrote extensively of Jacob's ladder in his book, Morals and Dogma, and even suggests that Jacob's ladder may in fact have been a pyramid. The book of Genesis tells us that when Jacob awoke from his dream, he took the stone and set it up for a pillar, and he said, "This stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house." As a result, some have come to believe that God, or the power of God, resides in the stone itself. From there, the legends vary, but one account says that the prophet Jeremiah took the stone and carried it into Scotland, where eventually the Scottish kings were crowned upon it.
In late March 1306, Robert the Bruce was enthroned as King of Scots at Scone in Perthshire.
An old Scottish poem says, "Except old seers do feign, and wizard wits be blind, the Scots in place must reign, where they this stone shall find." Eventually, the stone was kept at Scone Palace and was hence called the Stone of Scone. To this day, the Scots also call it the Stone of Destiny. In the year 1296, King Edward I of England captured the stone, and it was taken to Westminster Abbey for the crowning of English monarchs. In this picture, you can see the stone itself in the compartment beneath the coronation chair, a chair that was specifically built to house the Stone of Destiny. The last monarch to be crowned upon it was Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. But in 1997, the English supposedly returned the ancient stone to the Scots, with the understanding that the future monarchs of England would continue to be crowned upon it. Today, the stone is said to be housed inside Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. There is even a self-guided tour where visitors can view the Stone of Destiny along with the Honours of Scotland, the crown jewels of Scottish royalty. According to the tour guide we spoke with while there, this is the legendary stone. But if this is true, then how could the stone have ended up inside a casket in the hands of Nicholas Roerich? The answer, given by Buff Perry and others, is that the stone currently at Edinburgh is a fake.
The stone of Scone, because the one that's actually in Edinburgh Castle is a fake, and most Scots know it. Because once the English came and stole it once, they were never going to be stolen again. So the one that's actually in the castle is not real.
Others, like Alex Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland, claimed that the stone taken by the English king in 1296 was a fake, and that the real stone was somehow hidden away secretly by the Scots. Exactly where the real Stone of Destiny is today, and how it may have changed hands over the centuries, continues to be a matter of debate. Nevertheless, its importance is recognized by nearly all occult societies in the world today.
It is the foundation stone of all history. It's also called the Philosopher's Stone. It has the lapis exilis in the Grail literature cycles that came out of Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach. Wolfram von Eschenbach writes in Parzival that the stone is called the Grail.
While the Holy Grail is traditionally thought of as the cup of Christ, those involved in secret societies believe that the original and oldest form of the Grail is the Stone of Destiny, written of by Wolfram von Eschenbach in his Grail legend, Parzival.
And he calls it lapis exilis, which is a way of saying the exiled or wandering stone. He does that because of the history known in Freemasonry and in the secret societies of this stone's movement around here and there, and where it would be would indicate the importance of that place.
The stone, mentioned in Eschenbach's Grail legend, is a green stone that some believe is similar to a type of meteorite known as moldavite. This description is said to have been confirmed by Nicholas Roerich while he claimed to have the stone in his possession. The secret societies believe that this stone, that supposedly fell from heaven, empowers that person or place of its location.
And it has to do with the secret history of America and why that stone arrived here, who brought it.
As we showed earlier, Dr. Obadiah Harris referred to it as the foundation stone of America.
What is the significance of the foundation stone of America?
Well, the foundation stone is really about what America is about, and also what England seems to be about. And so it's really, it implies the great mysteries that was contained in the great mystery schools and of those who had this vision.
Was it this mystery school vision that guided FDR and his fellow Mason, Henry Wallace, as they set the all-seeing eye of the great architect on the back of the dollar bill? When one considers the repeated use of the word destiny by Manly Hall, who wrote of the secret destiny of America, along with FDR, who had knowledge of Hall's library, and who said that Americans had a rendezvous with destiny. And then Henry Wallace, who referred to America itself as the land of destiny. It only makes sense that such men would have taken an interest in the stone of destiny. That Henry Wallace had an interest in seeking the Holy Grail is proven by the letters he wrote to Nicholas Roerich. As a Freemason, he would have seen an occult connection with America, since the stone of destiny is said to have come from heaven to earth, from the dog star Sirius. Known as the brightest star in the heavens, Sirius is an important key to understanding the stone and what the secret societies intend for the destiny of America. When the United States was founded, the architecture of Washington, D.C. was designed in alignment with the rising of Sirius in the east. July 4th, Independence Day, is the day when the sun is in conjunction with this star, said to be 23 times more powerful than the sun itself. Also consider that Sirius is the blazing star or pentagram used in Masonic lodges. But as this mystical symbol relates to the dollar bill, we read that the famous emblem of the all-seeing eye, seen hovering above the unfinished pyramid, is a depiction of the Eye of Sirius and is a common motif found throughout Masonic lore. The importance of Sirius to the secret societies cannot be overstated. Some believe that the secrets of this star are a matter of life and death. In our last documentary, Riddles in Stone, Dr. Robert Hieronymus explained the importance of the dog star Sirius. This happened during a casual discussion, and some of what he said took us by surprise. Listen now to his uncut explanation to understand how critical the secrecy of this symbol is to Freemasonry and all the secret societies. And as you listen, remember, it is Sirius that rises in the east behind the sun, which stands as a picture of the twofold nature of every symbol in the occult.
Interesting thing about all Freemasonry is that symbolism is ultimately very important. They don't put a lodge in the east because it's a nice place and it looks good. They put it in the east. The masters have put it in the east, so because
it's the rising sun.
It's the rising sun. You're catching the energies of the light, and to them, they didn't believe that the sun was God. All right, like we're told, the ancient Egyptians, we're told all the time that they thought the sun was God. Well, to simplify it, do I have time to tell them this part?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. As with all secret societies, you have levels, and if you're on the lower levels, you don't even know they're upper levels. They don't even tell you. Right. You bump into it by accident, or someone comes along. Now, in Scottish Rite, that's something different, because they know that there's a. But before then, and basically secret societies, such as, let's go to ancient Egypt. To the ancient Egyptians, the priest would tell the serfs, the guys that tilled the land, they would say, the sun is God. Okay? And so they accepted that very low-level interpretation, all physical. That's not what the priests believed. What the priests believed, there was a second level. The priests believed that, no, the physical sun is not the supreme being. It's the spirit which flows through the physical sun that is the supreme deity. However, there was another level. And the priests didn't even know it. It's those that were involved and elevated to if I would have told you this 15 years ago, I might have gotten shot. But this is now, I'm so glad now that this is easy to talk about. The third level, which is a higher level of understanding, said, nope, it's not, that's not the sun. The sun is not the supreme deity. Nope, yes, spiritual energies come through the sun. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the star Sirius.
The dog star.
The dog star, because the dog star was everything to the ancient Egyptians, with the rising of the Nile and the feeding of the people, and so.
Overton says that Washington D.C. was the dog star was important in the founding of Washington D.C.
Indeed, it was, yes, and that's a reflection on America. But the point I was just trying to make was that third level is never told. And with every group, every secret society I belong to, over 15 or 16, I don't belong to any of them now. I can't.
15 to 16
different
secret societies?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, there were many different types.
While Dr. Hieronymus's claims of belonging to more than a dozen secret societies might sound incredible, it is important to remember that he is the most highly recognized authority on the history of the Great Seal.
Eye in a triangle in the pyramid.
And he is closely associated with the leading Masonic apologist in America, Dr. S. Brent Morris.
Now, Bob Hieronymus, Dr. Bob, is the expert on the Great Seal.
Because of this, we believe the insights of Dr. Hieronymus, not only into the Great Seal, but also on the importance of the dog star Sirius to secret societies, becomes that much more significant. Listen again to what he says about Sirius when we make mention of the book on the secret design of Washington, D.C. by Masonic author David Oveson.
And so
Oveson says that Washington, D.C. was the dog star was important in the founding of Washington, D.C.
Indeed, it was, yes, that's a reflection on America. That's a reflection on America.
How is Sirius a reflection on America, according to the secret societies? And is it just a coincidence that the Stone of Destiny, awaited by an American vice president, and supposedly in the possession of his guru, is said to have come from this blazing star? In the occult, the stone is not only a type of the Holy Grail, but seems to be a symbol for the secrets of Masonry as understood by Henry Wallace. In his book, The Occult Conspiracy, Michael Howard says of Wallace that the Secretary of Agriculture was well versed in occult knowledge. In a letter to his Russian guru, he stated, "The search, whether it be for the lost word of Masonry, or the Holy Chalice, or the potentialities of the age to come, is the one supremely worthwhile objective. So may we strive for the chalice and the flame above it." Howard says the chalice he refers to is the Holy Grail, regarded by the Rosicrucians as a feminine symbol for perfection, and the age to come is the dawning of the Aquarian Age. The concept of the flaming chalice is another repeated theme in the paintings of Nicholas Roerich.
And you can see this entity holding the chalice, and there's a flame coming up from the middle of the cup part of the chalice. This is a painting of Prophet Muhammad, and interestingly, he's viewing a specter of a person of some sort or other who's bearing in the heart area the chalice that's burning the flame. That's consistent with Zoroastrian motifs as well as Agni Yoga. But when I was in Isfahan, for example, and in Tehran, I visited the Zoroastrian temples, and those chalices that bear the flames are as big as I am. And I'm sure that Nicholas Roerich had the occasion to see those chalices in the Zoroastrian temples in his journeys through the East and the Near East. But this is definitely Muhammad. He's named it Muhammad the Prophet. But for some interesting reason, Muhammad is viewing some kind of spiritual entity with that fire-bearing chalice in the heart zone.
While Roerich's paintings are today kept in a modest museum in Manhattan, they were once kept in a towering building on the Upper West Side. In the 1920s, Roerich was supported by a wealthy benefactor and Freemason named Louis Horch. Like Wallace, Horch considered Roerich to be his guru and financed the construction of a massive building to honor him. It was called the Master Building. During this era, Roerich designed what he called a peace banner that went along with the Roerich Peace Pact that had been signed by Henry Wallace. The symbol was simply 3 circles in a triangle formation. This symbol can be seen even today, engraved on the black cornerstone of the Master Building. Buff Perry and others believe that certain arcane contents, including the Stone of Destiny, were placed inside this cornerstone when it was laid.
This is the seal over the cornerstone of the Master Building that is at the corner of 103rd and Riverside Drive. And here you see 1929 and the 3 circles with an M and then an R beneath it. And I believe that means Master Roerich, meaning master building in effect. He was like an edifice to people at that time.
So the idea of the master building was the idea that Roerich himself was the master, is that
Absolutely,
correct?
Absolutely. The whole building was built for him, for his use, in his honor and in his name. And it was to be used as a place where there would be art galleries, art studios. Great writers of the past lived there.
Joseph Campbell was there?
Joseph Campbell lived there for a period of time.
Joseph Campbell was a highly regarded esoteric who wrote about the power of myth. His works are still celebrated by the Theosophical Society to this day. Another 20th century luminary who frequented the Master Building was Manly P. Hall. Hall was clearly interested in Roerich, and in his books wrote about the symbolism of the stone that is called the Grail.
And we don't know where that stone is today. I think that Buff Perry knows a little more about where it might be now, but some believe it's in the foundation stone of the Roerich Building, the Roerich Museum, there in New York. Mr. Hall used to go to the Roerich Museum in his early days, just after he had written the big book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, because there in the penthouse of the Roerich Building met the very elite, the esoteric elite, you might say, who were really into not only the mysteries of the great world religions, but also the mysteries that many people don't know that was part of the motivation in the founding of our own country.
While the Master Building today is used mainly for apartment living, the penthouse, located in the upper levels, is still there. Is it possible that Henry Wallace could have been one of those esoteric elite who met there with men like Manly Hall? There is at least one record of his meeting with Nicholas Roerich at the Master Building. American Heritage reports that Wallace visited the museum and was thrilled beyond measure to receive a brief audience with Roerich. He found the artist's appearance, demeanor, and plans to promote culture and peace extremely impressive. He admired Roerich's paintings because, he said, they gave him a smooth feeling inside. The article goes on to say that Wallace avidly read the painter's writings and frequently communicated with the officials of the Roerich Museum. Whether FDR himself ever attended the penthouse meetings is unknown, but it is reported that the president's mother was an admirer of Roerich, and Roosevelt himself had once met and been favorably impressed by the artist. It is also worth noting that in 1932, First Lady-elect Eleanor Roosevelt gave a lecture at the Roerich Museum Lecture Hall. American Heritage writes, the State Department grew very nervous about Roerich, but he had influence in the Oval Office. With such connections, is it possible that inside the mysterious penthouse at the upper level of the Master Building, the so-called esoteric elite decided on the design for America's dollar bill? Remember that the Master Building was finished in 1929. The Great Seal was not placed on America's currency until 6 years later, in 1935. All of the players in this drama were involved in Masonry, including the Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau.
When Morgenthau, the Secretary of the Treasury, regretted having placed the all-seeing eye on the verso of the American dollar bill, he made reference to a small Kabbalistic group that used that symbol in their ceremonies, and because of that regretted that that symbol ever would have made it onto the dollar bill, which to me is rather peculiar because Masons for centuries had already used that all-seeing eye in their lodges, in their literature, and in all means and manner of expression.
Perry's suggestion is that while Morgenthau, as a Mason, might not object to a Masonic symbol, he was concerned about the influence of what appeared to be a personality cult surrounding Nicholas Roerich.
He was a little embarrassed that perhaps all of the information got out, that Nicholas Roerich, the guru, would have been instrumental in seeing to it that that symbol ended up on the dollar bill.
We took a trip to the Master Building and met with the building's historiographer, Mildred Spicer. She lives inside one of the apartments with a view through the right-angled windows that are famous for being the first of their kind. Whether or not they were intended to represent the Pythagorean right triangle, a favorite symbol among Masons, is for the viewer to decide.
Rorick's idea was to have that Mason symbol put on the dollar bill, so every resident in the U.S. is connected to Rorick through the dollar bill.
While we were there, Mildred confirmed that Rorick's chief financial supporter, Louis Horch, was in fact a 33rd degree Freemason.
And that was given, sent to me by Oriole. Her father was Louis Horch, and she and her mother, Nettie Horch, were very involved with the museum. And during this time, they were caught up in the mysticism of Rorick.
And those who were part of Rorick's inner circle were invited to the highest level. With Mildred's help, we were able to make our way up the elevators and then the many stairs to the much talked about penthouse, which some have called a kind of temple or meditation room.
There, is that where they had their meditation?
No, the meditation was right back of you. We had that apartment, and it was...
Behind this green door may well have been the place where Nicholas Roerich met with men like Manly Hall, Henry Wallace, and countless others to discuss America's secret destiny and quite probably the occult design of the Great Seal. The penthouse is currently used as an apartment, and we were unable to see inside of it. But we followed Buff Perry onto the roof to get a look at the architecture from the exterior.
We're at the very top of the master building, and behind you is the river, and in front of you is the outside walling of the meditation room or temple or whatever one wants to call it, the chapel that Roerich had constructed for his private spiritual purposes.
So it's right on the other side of this wall.
It's this, all this in here. And that's the very top.
The staggered layers at the top of the penthouse seem to bear some resemblance to one of Roerich's paintings titled Arhat. In Buddhism, Arhat is the highest level of enlightenment, said to be the ultimate goal of nirvana. In Roerich's painting, notice the image of the Buddhist figure sitting inside the staggered stones, perhaps a symbol for the enlightened esoteric elite in the meditation room. The master building rooftop is undoubtedly interesting, especially since it overlooks the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, the largest cathedral in the world, where many of the occult concepts of America all seem to come together. What's interesting is that much of the cathedral was being built during FDR's administration. On the outside there is a cross before what is called the Rose Window, an obvious symbol of Rosicrucianism. Inside the cathedral, we find praying saints alongside lurking demons. An image of what looks like a Zoroastrian Maitreya hangs upon a cross at the altar. Meanwhile, an upside-down cross is seen in one of the alcoves, serving as a monument to September 11th. Elsewhere, a phoenix bird is carved beneath the pulpit. A carving of George Washington is found next to that of William Shakespeare. And on the floor is the seal of St. Albans. St. Albans was one of the names given to Sir Francis Bacon. And in the midst of it, we find obvious imagery pertaining to the Holy Grail. Some more obvious than others, like this seal on the floor of the cathedral. But notice that there are two cups beneath the cross. Could this be suggestive of the two grail concept put forth by Wolfram von Eschenbach and others, who believe that the grail is both the cup of Christ and the stone of destiny? It is worth noting that Grail legends were of great importance during the time of FDR and the whole World War II generation. Not only in America, but in Europe, Richard Wagner based his famous opera, Parsifal, on the writings of Wolfram von Eschenbach. This opera would become a central focus for Adolf Hitler, and as a result, there are some who have argued that Hitler's whole life was dedicated to the Holy Grail. Occult historian Tracy Twyman writes of what Hitler and other occultists believed about the Grail, that it dates long before the time of Christ, all the way back to ancient Atlantis. She writes that just as Hermes possessed a magic stone, which has been associated with the Holy Grail, Hercules also possessed a heavenly stone and a special cup that he carried it in. According to Plato's dialogue, the Pillars of Hercules were the gateway to Atlantis. This may be why Sir Francis Bacon used these same pillars as a symbol for achieving greater knowledge. Oddly enough, about the same time the Masons were finishing the work on the master building, Nicholas Roerich finished this painting titled The Last of Atlantis. Which brings us back to the greater mystery of the Roerich building and what may be the secret key to understanding the dollar bill. But first, how did the Stone of Destiny come into the possession of Nicholas Roerich?
The receiving of this stone in the Rothenburg casket was very mysterious. Nobody's completely certain who sent it to him, but he and his wife Helena were in Paris in 1923 in an exquisite suite when all of a sudden this was delivered. And it was delivered in this box, and the box says 5 Place Vendôme, and that's 5 Vendôme Place, which was where they were staying, and it was sent from Bankers Trust, from M.M., and it's addressed to Madame and Monsieur N. Roerich. And after many years, this is what has come of the Rothenburg casket that was in this pine wood box.
But why would this artifact have been delivered to Nicholas Roerich? And could it have really ended up inside the cornerstone of the master building, as Buff Perry and others believe?
When it was mysteriously delivered to Nicholas Roerich in 1923, he carries it around. He ends up going to India with it. By 1929, he's had this huge building, a 29-story Art Deco building built for him in New York City by Louis Horch, an investment banker, with a cornerstone prepared to have this sacred casket bearing the stone and other artifacts sent from India, because he's now taking it in 1923 from Paris to India, and placed in the cornerstone for posterity.
All of this might seem a bit too incredible, except for the fact that the laying of the cornerstone for the master building was a major event in 1929, attended by foreign dignitaries from around the world. From Spain, France, Poland, Australia, Romania, and a host of other countries. Why would they all turn out for this event?
This 1929 event is very important. Albert Einstein sent a tribute, which I have a copy of, to the construction of the building, to the meaning of Nicholas Roerich, who he was, what he was doing for humanity, and why the laying of this cornerstone was so important. Rabindranath Tagore, many luminaries and notables, government officials and the like, including Henry Wallace, who became FDR's vice president, first Secretary of Agriculture and then vice president in the next decade. And that becomes very intriguing, what all the connectedness is in terms of FDR, Freemasonry, and the stone.
Just as Freemasons were involved with the designing of the dollar bill, they were also involved in the construction of the Master Building. As noted earlier, the Master Building was financed by Louis Horch, who was appointed to a number of government offices during FDR's administration. In fact, he was placed in charge of the Department of Commerce by his fellow Freemason and Roerich disciple, Henry Wallace. As we have seen, Wallace, in his letters, shared a fascination with the Stone of Destiny.
And so the stone today is in this building?
The stone is in this casket, said to